My name is Bill Remek, and I'm the special advisor and senior advisor for the Global Immunization Action Network team and a longtime stem cell advocate. I want to welcome everybody here at the World Stem Cell Summit 2021, and we have a very special panel here for you right now. The topic we're going to discuss is called Health Literacy, Stem Cell Science, Vaccine Development and Confidence in the Age of the COVID Pandemic and Infodemic. And so if you don't quite know what that is, you'll learn about it right now. So my esteemed guests are Tina Pernat, who's in Europe, calling in from Europe, and Dr. Timoteo Pomerati, who's calling from Georgia, United States, Milan Mishkovic, who's calling from North Macedonia, Jonathan Thomas, who's calling from California, and Marie Cheta, who's also calling from California. And I want to also acknowledge our engineer, Darius Rego, who's also here in Northern California. And I'm here in also Northern California. So let's get started. Let me tell you that this issue related to false information and misinformation around the world regarding science has been a big problem. And in addressing that, there have been a lot of efforts put together by a number of countries and World Health Organization to address it. But it's not an easy task, and it requires a lot of resources and a lot of different activities to make it truly effective. But we're going to talk about this now. And I have a number of questions I'm going to present to the panelists so that we can examine this issue more closely and see what we can understand from this moving forward. So I'm going to start now with really one of the key questions, and that is, what is infodemics or infodemiology, and how does this impact science and technology efforts to battle public health challenges with the crisis we're experiencing today? And I'm going to ask Tina to explain that from her perspective.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Great.
Yes, so I'll be speaking from the health emergency, public health perspective on this. So, some think that the infodemic is only a problem of online misinformation. But really, experience has showed us that in times of an epidemic, we experience a surge of information and rumors, and then this includes misinformation. And all of this happens in online and offline worlds. And when in a time of an emergency and an uncertainty, when people are faced with this infodemic, it's harder for them to find reliable information that could help them then make informed decisions to enact behaviors to protect their health and their communities. And we've learned that it doesn't only have a direct impact on health or cause confusion. Really important, it exacerbates mistrust in science, in health authorities, and in public health measures, or reduces acceptance of vaccines or treatments. And it has a wider societal impact, such as stigma or loosening of social cohesion. And what makes COVID-19 infodemic different is that it's that the epidemic is taking place in a globalized, digitized society. So this has made the challenge really, really a large one. Just last year, for example, over 200,000 preprints were published online on COVID-19. The science has evolved and the pandemic response has evolved with it. Rumors and misinformation travels across borders very quickly. And this has put a strain, not just on how to communicate the evolving scientific knowledge, but also it has challenged how to enable more nimble pandemic response based on the needs and concerns of communities. So, you know, if the infodemic really is a global phenomenon, but to reduce its harmful effect, we need everyone involved. So this is not just the job of health authorities, but also the media, journalists, science community, civil society, fact checkers, even ourselves in our daily lives. So this would be a summary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Timoteo, tell me how you have observed these kind of issues in South Africa.
Even in South Africa, there are a lot of misinformation traveling up around, even from the beginning of COVID itself. The belief of some people was Africans weren't going to be infected with COVID. People were not going to die in Africa, but you know, time has actually shown us that that's not true. People have died in Africa too, in South Africa, in other parts of the African continent. And this misinformation is fueled by both religious belief and also traditional beliefs systems. So, and we cannot run away from the past of why people have this mistrust, especially for Western things. Some people believe it's going to affect fertility. Some people believe it may affect, it may cause death or some form of severe illness on the long run. So like I said, we cannot run away from what has happened in the last 100 years or 200 years to fuel this kind of belief. But like Tina said, this misinformation has to be dealt with the kind of correct information where people can get access to them easily, maybe from the WHO, CDC, but you only fight the misinformation with the correct information. So that's what I'll say. And even here in Atlanta, my experience has also not been so great, especially amongst the people of color. I discuss with people, it's something I just randomly do with people of color. And the responses have always been greater than 70%. People of color will say, no, I don't want to get the vaccine. And like I said, I understand where they're coming from. I'm not undermining their reasons for that, but we just need to address it with the correct information, like Tina said. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to kind of turn the tide over to this topic, which is how is stem cell science and regenerative medicine had parallels with vaccine hesitancy and health literacy in its attempts to address false and misleading information being used to thwart scientific progress. And I'd like to toss this over to Jonathan. What are your views on that?
So Bill, thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I think the issues surrounding regenerative medicine and vaccines do have commonality in that there is sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of how they work. And I think it's very important for the public to know what the science is so they can appreciate exactly what's happening. So if I could just turn to a bit of a primer on the vaccine front, just for everybody's quick benefit. As everybody knows, they've seen many pictures of the coronavirus, and it has on it a series of spikes, which they call spike proteins. And it's those spike proteins that basically jab your cells and allow the virus to be injected into them and to do its damage. So the vaccines work in different ways, and they all work in simulating that spike protein to get your immune system going to do something with it. The mRNA vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna use, you get a shot, many of you have had that, hopefully already, into your arm muscle, and that shot, the mRNA carries genetic instructions into your cells to simulate the production of the spike protein, and that gets your immune system to develop antibodies that will attack the virus. And as you've seen with Pfizer and Moderna, the efficacy of that has been tremendous, over 90%, and has worked almost beyond expectations. The J&J vaccine is a little different. The transmission vehicle, if you will, for that vaccine is something called an adenovirus. And the adenovirus has the DNA for the spike protein spliced into it, so that when you get the J&J shot, it delivers that spike protein DNA to your cells, and that gets your cells to simulate again the spike protein, and that in turn is attacked by your immune system. Very efficacious as well. There are, by the way, no stem cells involved in either technology. But it's important to understand what's going on here. There has been no risk assigned to this that's been rigorously tested for safety and toxicity and efficacy. And it's important to understand that the science makes this possible. So with that as a bit of a primer, I would just ask that that everybody who has concerns about how these things work, learn about them and get yourself comfortable, because these are highly viable and highly effective treatments that wouldn't have been possible a number of years ago. So with that, that would be my comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Marie, do you want to?
Well, your original question was
Yes.
talking about the parallels between
Yes.
human embryonic stem cells and vaccination. And I think a huge parallel that makes it difficult for people to hear is fear of the new, fear of the unknown, and fear of what you can't see. And I really found that making these scientific explanations to a sophisticated audience is done in the way that Jonathan did just beautifully. But for the vast majority of Americans, they have no clue what RNA is. So we really need to use cartoons to understand the scale of what we're talking about. You know, when you see that coronavirus on TV, I think my father, who's 95 years old, thinks it's the size of my desk. And we also need cartoons to make the analogies. I mean, I don't understand the immune system. I've tried for a lifetime, but we need analogies like locks and keys and all of that when we're explaining these very complex issues. So yes, I think that embedding all scientists in the science so that they can better explain to each other is very important, and to a sophisticated audience, but we need tools to explain it to the average person.
Thank you for that. I want to go on to the direction that vaccine development and uptake, where that's going, and really what are the greatest dangers to disease control stemming from ignorance of science or science denial, or illiteracy, or health illiteracy, and how you see that in our society today from the public health standpoint. And I want to ask Timoteo to comment on that.
Like Jonathan just said now, we have this new technology. It's been there a couple of years back, but this is the first real live test for this new technology, mRNA vaccine production. And it's been amazing, it's been great. So, I mean, compared to 50, 60 years ago when it was live vaccine, subunits, but now we're moving towards reverse vaccinology, mRNA vaccine. So in terms of the direction vaccinations are going, I think we are moving forward with newer technology coming into place now, we can fine-tune the spike protein Jonathan talked about to deal with probably newer strains of this COVID virus. So in terms of technology, in terms of research, we're moving forward. But now come to think about it. I mean, look at it. When this outbreak started, distribution was upped, the game was upped, networking between countries, between organizations. So I think in terms of science, we're moving ahead. But now the problem comes with the misinformation, the disinformation, the infodemic. I mean, people have access to digital technology. Just a couple of weeks ago, I saw on the internet, someone said, if you put a magnet on the site of the injection, it glues on the skin that there's a metal there, So anybody can make a video and it goes viral. And it all fuels this issue of hesitancy amongst those who we want them to get the vaccine. So that is what I see as a challenge. Now, the question of this hesitancy, people being reluctant or not taking it at all, or just doing a wait and see kind of approach, is it going to be temporary? Is it going to be a long-term thing? I don't know. I mean, even before COVID vaccine, in some of the Western countries anyway, there were issues of, hesitancy. In some Western countries, there were outbreak of measles, outbreaks of some other diseases. So it's been there, but now with COVID, will it just get worse? I think time will let us know. Will it affect other vaccination programs? I think time will let us know. And so one of the things I do is when I'm trying to engage with people in recent times, I'll say, though the US is trying, but they could do better in terms of the vaccination program. But if we look at the US now, we have almost 50% of the adult population that have been vaccinated, which is wonderful. I mean, and if you look at Israel and the UK, they've done pretty well. They've done well in the vaccination program with COVID. And if we also look at the data, it's in line with what they've done. The numbers are down. The number of deaths are down. And that's one of the ways I use to engage with people to say, so now if we're saying, I mean, I'm just using these three countries as an example, the US, the UK, and Israel. So what do you think they've done differently? To my opinion, the only thing they've done differently is massive vaccination of the populace. That's what they've done differently. And, using public health safeguard measures. That's what they've done. And that's what the other places where we have upticks in the numbers are probably not done enough. Like, unfortunately, with India, with this increase in number of new infections and deaths. So this is one of the things I use in engaging with people, trying to bring them onto the side of science so that they can see reason why vaccination is the way to go.
Very good. How do you see the actual greatest danger of these denials, or rather the greatest danger to actually controlling the disease? Where do you see that concentrated in this science denial that's in society today? How do you? What is that? What is the impact that is having on actually controlling the disease?
The impact it's having on controlling the disease is, one, it has economic impact. Countries are still not fully open, the aviation industry, the hospitality industry. So it's having those impacts. And for me, it's not just going to have impact on COVID. It's already having impact on COVID. People are dying in their thousands in India, in other part of the world. It's also going to have impact on the other vaccination programs, the EPI program, the elderly vaccination, because people are now going to be more hesitant. And I'm just hoping, I hope not in the near future, that we don't have an increase in infectious diseases, because people are now going to be more reluctant, and this will now cause a spike in infectious diseases, like, the ones we've already knocked out, such as measles, in some places polio, and we start seeing an uptick in the number of these cases, especially in the younger ones, and also the older people, the elderly, may be reluctant to get vaccination. Then we also need to face the pregnant women. They may also start getting reluctant, getting vaccination. Then we see diseases that have been controlled to the barest minimum now, rearing their ugly heads up again. And that's what I hope we do not foresee in the near future.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I was going to ask, Milan, do you have any comments with regard to that on what you're seeing in Eastern Europe.
Yes, thank you very much, Bill, for the question. I was listening all the panelists, and I'm admired of the dedication of how we need to proceed and with the new technology and the new achievements which are in front of us. But we have another, let's say, challenge or issue or something like that. We know that from patient perspective, if you ask me, we have the challenge that the patient all the time have the one of the biggest risks, particularly the chronic patients. Now with the massive vaccination and with all initiatives which were to explain to these groups why they need to get this vaccine for COVID-19 was one of the most important questions, and how to do it and which one to be chosen and everything. And the second challenge was how you mentioned in the beginning, the infodemic. A sea of information coming to them, and a lot of information was, let's say, misinformation which were coming, let's say, from very, very intellectual people from the health scientific field. Let's say some very, very high-level doctors, scientific researchers, and also from very strong movements and leaders of some patient networks. This means we have let's say double, not problem, but double challenge. Because in this kind of problems like this one with COVID-19 pandemic, most important for us is to have the trust to the industry, trust to our doctor, and trust each other, all other engaged stakeholder inside. In this misinformation field of CEO with a lot of information, we miss one part that I know that a lot of you are scientific researcher and everything, but we know that some of your colleagues make a bigger trouble than help in this kind of situation. That we need from patient perspective to understand the point. For example, why I need to be vaccinated because I'm a chronic liver patient, and what is my benefits? What is my negative side effects if tomorrow I get this vaccine? The table is from two sides, and the knowledge which is served, scientific knowledge, must be, let's say, supported from all the groups we trust. That is most important, which I noticed, particularly in the eastern part. If you notice, the past few months, we have enough vaccines, but the level of the people who like to get this vaccine is going down very fast. Why? The numbers going down. We have the pandemic still. It's going on, or what is going on? This situation after the third wave, some of the patients and some of the practitioners are changing their minds, especially the GPs. That means we need more to work on this network to be more stronger, more, let's say, confidential between them, and trustable, to trust between us, to have the trust. When I go to ask my doctor, hey, I have this kind of condition, tell me the source of this kind of vaccines, what is eligible for me or not, or what is the consequences. Yes. This is my point.
Thank you for that. Let me kind of switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about the dangers to industry, but also the scientific community, and because so many of us support the scientific community, what really are the best ways to address increasing confidence of the public to accept the benefits resulting from innovations to improve health and wellness? And not just the dangers, but what should we be doing in the scientific community? And I want to toss this question to Marie, because because of her experience, what could we do to really bring this, the scientific community to help support a better environment so that we can proceed without this hindrance?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is we have to get out there, and we have to get out there with people who have expertise, but also know how to tell a story. And this really has enormous parallels back to the original days of CERM and the vaccination now. I think what's really a huge danger of the very public science skepticism currently is that it has just reinforced pushing us into our own cultural corners, where you only get information from some places and not from others. And that puts it on us to go out to the communities where we're not necessarily welcome, because we're not going to change any minds unless we go out there and show that we are well-meaning people, that we really understand the primary source data and can explain it to people who will not ever go to that data. And we also have to explain to them the dangers of taking policy from people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And that's a very difficult place to be. I mean, tomatoes getting tossed at you is probably the best thing that can happen in that kind of situation. But scientists have been really bad. Tina mentioned this, your day-to-day life is really important, because from you can spawn so many other little educators. We've been really bad about getting out into the communities that don't want to hear from us. And I think it's the only way for this to happen. I've been really fortunate to be part of the Medical Reserve Corps, which is an organization run out of Health and Human Services, to be working for LA County in its mass vaccination campaign. And putting a shot in somebody's arm takes a second, but that contact that you have with them, and I can see 1,000 people a day, is really critical to getting them out to educate their peers, especially in places in LA County I never thought I'd see. So I do think that, and the first important thing that we have to tell people is that when scientists make policy, that's an evolving science based on the data. And we can say something about the vaccines now, after millions of people have been vaccinated, about expectations that we couldn't say at the beginning of the clinical trials. We can manage expectations now about cell therapies that we couldn't say in 1998. So really, really important for all of us to be out there telling a story in clear ways to the people who don't want to hear from you.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. And Tina, do you have a comment to that?
I totally agree with her. We all actually face the same challenge. How do you convince others to believe something that emotionally they don't want to believe? And really, when you think about scientists, scientists have been disincentivized from promoting public understanding or learning how to communicate and promote science, other than in peer-reviewed publications. And this pandemic has shown that we must really change this. So everything that Marie has suggested, I totally give a thumbs up, +1, because we really should be mindful of our responsibility to science, but also to our accountability to the public. And we do have a responsibility to to be proactive, to ensure that the work that we publish is understood as intended, with all of the limitations, all of the unknowns, the uncertainty, and the evolution of science.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move over to getting a little deeper into that and to ask you all, how can stakeholders in this age of pandemic and misinformation enact plans for further stem cell research of diseases of aging, chronic diseases, infectious diseases, despite the stresses on our health systems or economy, and in spite of the deniers of sound health policies and sometimes confusing guidance from government public health sources. And I actually want to ask Jonathan to give me your perspective in terms of how this is something you've had to deal with, because actually this is a government agency that you run. How do you deal with what would you suggest the stakeholders in this field do to provide better direction?
So I think it's important, first of all, to understand the breadth of possibilities that you find with regenerative medicine research. We out in California are funding, we now have had the voters approve $8.5 billion worth of state money to go towards grants for different types of research for every basically type of disease you can think of, starting with all the big ones, whether it's cancer, diabetes, vision disorders, neurological diseases, or what have you, all the way down to a number of rare or so-called orphan diseases. The field has potential applicability to virtually everything. So taking that as a basis for what we're dealing with here, the agency itself, CIRM, came about as a result of a stakeholder at the time when the federal government had a funding ban on any NIH research to develop more embryonic stem cell lines. My predecessor, Bob Klein, felt that stem cells were the way to go, starting with, he had a child with type 1 diabetes. He worked within the system out here, which was to qualify a ballot measure for the vote in the November general election through getting 1 million+ signatures. It then went to a campaign which resulted in the passage of Proposition 71. That was re-upped last year when we ran through our first allocation of funds on the last November ballot. And between the two, as I say, it was resulted in $8.5 billion to put into stem cell research. So the issue is that this is almost a state by state thing, because different states allow for different ways to enact things to enable stem cell research. It's complicated because unfortunately, science has gotten bogged down in ideological wars, and that has led to certain types of research being viewed negatively in some states versus others. California obviously is the other way. It felt this is something that was very important to the field. But I think with respect to each state and the citizens of each state, it's first and foremost important to get the policymakers to understand the importance and the viability of science. And if you go back in history and you look at vaccines, there's always been skepticism. You go back to Edward Jenner with smallpox in the late 1790s, and you work all your way up through whether it's flu vaccines or polio vaccines or now the coronavirus vaccines. There are skeptics because there fundamentally isn't an understanding of the science itself. The science is very sound. It is rigorously tested. It is robustly analyzed, and treatments aren't going to be out there unless the experts in our country and the FDA and the CDC believe that it will do what it's supposed to do and it'll be safe to the public. So what I would say is, whatever state you're in or whatever country you're in or whatever, what's needed is an education approach to the policymakers and to let the science dictate, because you see what happens, as I said before, without the development of science and the applicability of the techniques that have been used to generate these vaccines that we're using now to save the world, we would be in a much worse place. So coordinate, educate, get out there and develop policy that'll make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Marie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because a word we haven't used here, which is the word we should be using, is communicate. And I think there's two populations of allies that I found incredibly potent in the stem cell world, as well as in the vaccination world acutely now. First, are patient advocates. We really have to get the patient advocates out there. There's some fields that are better than others. For inherited retinal diseases, the Foundation for Fighting Blindness is an incredibly potent ally in the stem cell arena. The second group of people that we really have to engage are teenagers. And I remember back before I came to CERM, I was a professor at Emory. Cobb County was trying to ban the teaching of evolution in the textbooks. This is, the year 2000. And I had Cobb County 8th graders in my lab making a film about embryonic stem cells. They educated their parents. It was unbelievable. And now what we're seeing in the LA Unified School District here is that the vaccine hesitant communities are most easily convinced by their teenagers who want the vaccine so that they can get back to real life. So we have to communicate, but we also have to communicate with allies that speak more the language of the people we're trying to reach.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to, this will be kind of our closing, but I'd like you to offer briefly some words of wisdom and where we go from here, and your ideas in terms of the future. So I want to start with Tina.
Thanks, Bill. Well, after listening to all of this, I guess I'd just like to reiterate that we all have a role to play in managing the infodemic, building trust in science, vaccines. And we need to do this both in our personal and professional lives. What we do in one and the other may be different. So as scientists and public health practitioners, for example, let's make really a concerted effort to learn to communicate beyond our scientific peers so that we can ensure that the science we publish is understood as intended by the rest of society, whether this is a policymaker or a particular a person in a vulnerable group or an ally. We really need to get out there, as Marie says.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask Timoteo for your final thoughts.
What Jonathan said, we need more funding, just like the previous administration and a previous administration in the United States had a pandemic preparedness in place. I think that needs to stay in place, and it has to stay put. More funding, like Jonathan said, has to be placed in it, because we can't say COVID will be the last. It may happen again in another 2 years. It could be 20, it could be 40, we don't know. But when you plan, when you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So that's what we need to do. We need to continue to plan. And like Maria also said, we need to look for people who can really tell the story. Because as scientists, as clinicians, we know the story, the scientific story, but conveying it to the lay person on the street becomes a lot more difficult. Like Tina also mentioned, we're used to, peer-reviewed journals and things like that. So we need people who can really tell the story the way it is and convey this message to the general population. I think that's the best way to go about it, to engage them at that level where they can understand this message, and that will probably lead to a change in the belief system about vaccine safety and efficacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, I'll hand it over to you for your final thoughts.
So I think one of the most important things we can do is to build off the success of the current vaccine program as emblematic of the viability of science and the value to the world of continuing to fund research. We have a once in a century example here of something that would not be possible were it not for continued rigorous emphasis on scientific development. And as the previous speakers have said, this is not the easiest thing to communicate. We have a thing at CERN where we have our scientists learn how to do 30-second elevator pitches on what they are working on, which really forces them to break it down into plain English and to make it understandable to everybody. And if we can do that in a way that uses the current programs as an example of the tremendous value to science, I think we have a good chance at influencing our policymakers to make them focus more on, as Timoteo said, preparedness is extremely important, and on funding the agencies that are capable of putting money out to further the research, whether it's NIH or whatever. So build off successes, educate in plain English, get the policymakers to buy in that this is something that is critical to going forward.
Thank you so much. Milan, your thoughts.
After so excellent panelists, I have something to say, but I will say one thing: multidisciplinary approach, diverse patient involving in all the levels of the stadiums, not just for dissemination and let's say awareness campaigns. And I agree with that we need the funding. There must be increased in the future if we like to achieve more successful, let's say, stories in our next generations.
Thank you. And Marie?
One of the things I think that has not been mentioned that we have to really make sure is part of everything that we talk about is that both in regenerative medicine and in vaccinations, we have a world of haves and have-nots, and our communication really has to be inclusive. Our education has to be really inclusive. And in terms of building towards the future, I think there's two ends of the timeline. One is that the need for increasing scientific literacy by starting in the grade schools now is enormous here. It's in the United States, it's really frightening to me how poor science understanding is compared to places like, say, South Korea or Japan on average. On the other end of the spectrum, when we tell our story, we have to instill hope, but we have to do it without magical thinking. Human embryonic stem cells were never meant to cure everything, as some people picked up from the way that they were presented in the media. Vaccines were never meant to cure everything either, but it's still important to instill a realistic hope in the short time frame and build to the future by educating our young people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, this wonderful panel, I want to thank all of you for joining us today and talking about this very important topic. And I wish you the very best for the rest of your day. And let me say, this has really been enlightening. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope all of you watching this have learned something, gained some perspective, and hope that this will help foster perhaps more activity to spread a greater understanding around the world. Thank you so much.